in terms of the etiquette. So in Korea, I think that it's really like organized by the age. So if you're the youngest in the company, then like small stuff like errands, um, you're supposed to do it for the elders. But in the United States, there's no such culture like that. And also, like after the meeting, so after the day, usually at the end of Friday in Korea, um, the boss takes out employees to like restaurants to just buy food. But here in the U.S., there's no culture like that. Um, and like in the U.S., normally they don't force you to drink. In Korea, like boss forces you to drink, and then you're supposed to take a shot with the boss. Like there should be like no excuse. Um,
May I ask some questions? Because I think regarded to some of the facts that you just mentioned, we have actually checked. And guys, I hope you're taking notes as well, because we have read some theories and maybe some articles in which some of these facts, cultural facts that you're mentioning, have been addressed in our classroom. For example, this age situation that you're talking about, we saw an example, and I'm asking you to give us your opinion. We saw one example in which I think it was a German supervisor from a European country came to Korea, I think, and he appointed supervisor a younger person instead of appointing the supervisor to the older people in that group. And the older people and everybody got so upset that they actually asked this person to be removed from the training program because of the age situation. Does this make sense? Is this something that could happen because of the age situation in a company?
are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you.
Oh, it's not just the age; it's also the rank. Like, if you're the higher position, then in Korea, you just have the power to make the lower rank people do the stuff for you, small stuff for you.
But even if it's like, I don't know, I'm going to mention this because maybe here in Mexico, this is not very good protocol, but can I ask somebody to bring me coffee, for example, if I am the boss?
In Korea, yes, but in the US, no.
That's exactly what I was going to tell you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you mentioned the age? You also mentioned the going out and the socializing after the end of the week, which is very common in Korea for the bosses to take out the employees and to actually go out and socialize. And this drinking situation in which you said also, if I'm understanding correctly, that if the boss tells you or invites you to drink, you have to say yes. Were you prepared for these changes before you moved to the States, or did you just adapt when you got there? What do you think about these differences, and how did you adapt when you arrived into the United States?
Oh, I adapted with no problem. It just felt I'm just kind of like go with the flow. So I didn't really have trouble adapting. Just felt natural to me.
Can you imagine if somebody from your family, maybe from an older generation, if they had to move to the States, do you think this will be a challenging situation adapting to all these changes?
Yes, yes, I think so because like older people generally have, I wouldn't call it privilege, but they're used to the younger people showing more respect to them. So if they move to the United States, I don't think they'll like uh, adapt easily.
So do you think older people maybe moving into the United States might see or might perceive these attitudes like being disrespectful, like people are being disrespectful to them?
Yes. So in Korean community, usually older people talk about how like young generation in the US are really rude.
I think that's a very important point that you're making. And I hope, guys, we can take notes of this because I think he just made a very interesting point. If you belong to an older generation, in this case, of course, he's from Korea, but I believe this is the same situation we can see happening in many other Asian countries. What he says is, and I hope I'm getting your name correctly. Can you pronounce your name, please?
Junghoon?
Junghoon. I hope I am pronouncing it correctly, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Junghoon. As Junghoon says, this will be very problematic, and people, older people in Korea, believe that people in the United States, young people in the United States, are very disrespectful. Am I understanding this correctly? Yes.
Yes.
And when you go back to Korea, or when young people go back to Korea after having lived in the States, do you think it's hard to, again, adapt to going back to this, very traditional way of treating older people? What do you think about that?
Uh, it depends how much of the person is adapted to the United States. So for me, I'm like partially adapted. I can just switch back and forth like Korean mode or American mode, but people who are like born in the United States, I think they usually have hard time like understanding the Korean culture in general.
Actually, that's a very good comment that you're making, and that was going to be my next question. You are very culturally adapted. I think we can see that you're very flexible and your English is very good. Would you say that your education when you were growing up in Korea was very globalized or very international? Or how come you're very open to these differences? Can you tell us a little bit about how is it that it is easier for you to adapt and go back and forth from one culture to another? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how come you're so culturally aware about these situations?
So when I was in Korea, I normally didn't see foreigners. Uh, like I almost always saw Asians around me. So whenever I saw like uh people in different race, I was like, oh, I felt weird and strange. But when I moved to the United States, like people around me are like diverse, and so I just got used to seeing like different races. But I'm pretty sure in Korea people don't have chance to see a lot of races. They like the environment wise, they only see Asians around them, so I think they're closed-minded people in Korea, but people in the United States, I think we're kind of open-minded.
Would you actually, were you born in Korea? Because you have been living in the United States for several years now, but were you born in Korea or are you just born from Korean parents?
I was born in Korea,
And how old were you when you moved to the States?
uh, 13.
Okay, that makes a huge difference because you were a teenager, and maybe even if those first years were tough for you to adapt, I believe you were at the perfect age for somebody to adapt. But as we have seen in class, guys, and now I'm going to ask you, students, to think about this. With older people, of course, when we're talking about business, etc., as he mentions, this is got to be a very difficult thing to adapt to. Do you know, in this case, somebody has, yes, don't worry. Do you know any Korean older businessman coming to the United States in the area where you live? And do you know if it's hard for them, or how do they deal with business? You know, like how do they choose who's going to come to the United States to do business? Like if you're talking about the fact that most older people are closed-minded, how do they deal with the business? You know, what do you think about this?
Or are you asking me again?
Yes, asking you again, Junghoon.
Uh,
Yes, don't worry. Don't worry. Same thing my students ask me. Don't worry. The question is, if you have known business people, businessmen coming to the area in the United States where you are or you live, and how do they deal with all these differences? And my second question is, do you also have business women, or what is the role of women in business in Korea? And of course, in the United States, we know it is open, but what do you think about Korea and women in business?
oh, man, I think they will have to adopt to American culture when they come here. Like, the company that I work for is owned by Chinese, but they go by the American culture.
Even if people there are Chinese, they go by American culture, right?
Right.
And can you tell us about the role of women in business in Korea? Is that something normal?
Uh, I think back in the days, like time before I was born, uh, people normally had like this thing on their mind that men are supposed to work, women are supposed to stay at home. That American culture has been like influencing Koreans now that they started thinking differently. Like there's um so a lot of old-minded people are gone, and the young the 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 American mind, people with American mindset, they're like the new leaders in Korea now.
That's very,
So
very, very important what you're just saying. So what you're saying is that people with a more globalized, a more international vision of the world, they are the new leaders in Korea. Is
yeah,
that what you're saying?
yeah, and so actually compared to before, in Korea we have more women in higher position, even the chair position, than ever in before.
I think this is huge what you just said. First, you're saying that American culture is starting to influence Korea, of course, Korean culture. And now you're talking about your vision on the new leaders of Korea, which are people who are much more culturally aware of all this awareness, but also, sorry, of all these differences, but also I imagine, just like you, people who are more flexible. Would you agree on this? People who are more flexible and be able to adapt and are able to adapt to different cultures?
Yes.
Wonderful. This is wonderful. I'm going to now ask students if you have any question, please, again, I'm going to try to pronounce your name. I hope I'm getting it correctly. Junghoon. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce it correctly. I'm trying. But if anybody has a question, please, would you please be so kind to ask a question? Yes, Danny, you have a question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Daniela, and I want to know if you have any friend from another culture that you have known, if for him or for her it was difficult to adapt in a business culture, or even when you was a child in a school or something, because America, it's so much multicultural. So I want to know if you know someone, because as you already said, it was I don't know, not difficult for you to adapt. So this is my question.
Oh,
Okay, if you know anybody who has had a hard time adapting, and why or how.
normally the older people who moved to the United States older than I did, so when they're already adult, and I think in general they have hard time. Like I know someone who moved at like 20 or 21
And can you give us
already.
examples? Can you give us some examples about why is it hard, or what is it that is hard for them? Like, give us examples of what was hard for them in order for them to adapt.
Like for example, like my one of my cousins, he moved here at like 2021, and um he just didn't understand that there's like almost no socialization after work. So he barely knew anyone from the work, because normally in Korea, because of the socialization after work, you get to know a lot of people.
That is actually very, very interesting, because we have read about it in the theories, but we didn't know. And this might be very difficult for somebody, as you said, 21, 20 years old, trying to adapt to the time of the work is over and everybody goes home. This has got to be very difficult when socializing after work is part of your culture in Korea. Am I correct?
Yeah, so he actually ended up quitting the job because I don't know, he felt lonely at the company, and he just went to the military in the United States.
I think this is very important, guys, and I hope you're taking notes of this. Somebody actually left, quit, the position in a work just because he felt lonely, of course, and I totally understand. He felt this socializing part, we might think is not so important, but it is. Can you imagine that? Very good. One more question. I think we have time for one more question. If you can raise your hands, students. Yes, Elisa, go ahead, and then we'll go to Michelle. Elisa first, go ahead.
You mentioned that you work in a company that is owned cultural clash with the way they implement their strategies.
So the question is if there is a clash between Chinese culture and Korean culture in the company that you're working at right now.
Oh, I want to say that it's pretty similar. I think a lot of Korean cultures are influenced by Chinese culture. Korea and China, they're like right next to each other. Yeah,
so you can say that yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, they have the similar culture as Koreans.
So it's not that hard for you to work together because your cultures are very similar, correct?
Correct. But
okay.
At the company, obviously, we go by American culture.
I think, Elisa, something that also Junghoon mentioned is that even though it's a Chinese company, it's very Americanized, Yes,
Yeah.
That's something that we can say. Thank you very much. Michelle, your question.
Hi, My question is about language. Was it like difficult to adapt to the jokes, to the double sense, like phrases that Americans have? Is there like some phrases or some words that are like disrespectful for you?
That's actually a very interesting question. When you moved, you were 13 years old. I'm going to add to Michelle's questions. Did you speak English before you moved to the United States? And either whatever answer it is, the question Michelle is asking is how difficult or easy it was for you to adapt to these phrases, expressions, double sense, jokes, etc., etc. If you can tell us about that, please.
Oh, at English, but I learned over time, and yeah, it was hard to adapt to like the phrases or expressions, idioms. I know what they mean in Korean, but I don't know what they mean in English, you know. But it's okay. Like I'm aware that I'm from a different country, although I'm the U.S. citizen now. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Very interesting. Anybody has one last question before we thank our guest? Any other question? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Junghoon. And thank you very much, Catherine. Who was in your team? Catherine and Leonardo Javier. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you so much, Leo. Thank you so much. You're welcome to stay, or if you have things to do, thank you. We really appreciate it. And let's give him a hand, please, for coming and talking to us for a few minutes. Thank you so much. And thank you for helping our Mexican students understand the culture of global business. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for
Bye.
inviting me. Yeah.
Okay, the rest of the class, stay, don't go. Thank you very much. Now we have 5 minutes to get ready for our next guest. I believe it's going to be Camila Camargo. And before we get ready for our next